Okay. Hello. So got a few people on already. With 6 minutes left to go. Hello. Get ready to start in 5 minutes. Give people a chance to check in. Hello, Yankee Apple. Greetings, Hua. Good to have you on board. Almost ready to start. Another less than a minute.
It's 6 o'clock.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. So this is the second talk on the subject of Abhidhamma, and I want to get into the introduction into the nature of mind, and then in the subsequent talks we'll get into it in a bit more detail. It's certainly a major theme of Abhidhamma. Before I dive into the material, I put up on the chat a couple of titles of recommended reading. I'm rereading this book as I do the talks. It's Karuna Dasa's Theravada Abhidhamma, and I really like his approach. He takes a historical approach, looking at the various layers of development and comparing, and he often brings in comparisons of the Theravada ideas with some of the other early schools of Buddhism, which adds a interesting sidelight. And there was at that time in India, in the centuries after the Buddha, it was quite a lively intellectual discourse. All the different schools working out different subtleties and nuances of the teaching. So last time I introduced the idea of Dhammas as ultimate reality. We'll begin there, talk about that a little bit more. There is a distinction made between two aspects or levels of reality, paramatta and panyati. Paramatta is ultimate reality, and the meaning of ultimate is clearly defined as meaning that it cannot be analyzed any further. It's important to avoid a substantialist interpretation. When we say that a Dhamma is an ultimate reality, it doesn't mean that the Dhamma is something with a self-existence. And this is one of the very important things about looking at the Abhidhamma, is to understand that the Dhammas themselves are without self. They exist only conditionally. That is, they are caused by other Dhammas, so they have no self-existence. And they are impermanent in that they really only exist for a moment. They arise and they cease. So there is no ultimate reality in an ontological sense. When we say that a Dhamma is ultimate or paramatta, it means, this is as far as we can analyze it. Beyond that, we cannot go. So the ultimate reality is, or paramatta level of reality, is composed of Dhammas, and there are physical Dhammas and mental Dhammas. The other level of reality is panyati, which is constructed or conventional or agreed reality. We might think of it as mundane reality, the ordinary world that we experience of individual persons, of objects. These are all panyati. They don't have any intrinsic reality. The mind is required to be present to create them out of dhammas. So the way we perceive the world of dhammas is we are not able to normally distinguish individual dhammas. We experience big conglomerations of dhammas as objects, whether they're animate like persons or animals, or whether they're inanimate like furniture or rocks. This is all conventional reality created by the mind out of dhammas, which is not to say, this is important too, it's not to say that they're unreal, but it's a different level of reality, and it's a level of reality that requires the intervention of the mind. This is one of the definitions of Paramatta Dhamma, is that a Paramatta Dhamma is existent, whether it's cognized or not. The mind doesn't create Paramatta Dhammas. But the conventional level of reality, Panyati, is a level known by the mind. It's how we perceive the reality of the world. And the ultimate realities, the Paramatta Dhammas, are classed into four broad categories. There is Rupa, which is matter, materiality. There's Chitta, which is the mind that knows, the subjective side of mind. There is Chitasaka, which is the processes of mind. The word Chitasaka means associated with Chitta. So they're adjuncts or auxiliaries that arise in the mind together with Chitta. And they are objective or external from the point of view of Chitta. And the fourth category is Nibbana, about which is supramundane, transcendental, and is not subject to any kind of analysis. So today I want to start the discussion by looking at the category of Chitta a little bit, and then in subsequent talk to go into the categories in which it's divided. Chitta is, in one sense, it's singular. There's only Chitta, but it can be classified into many different modes or types, mainly according to which Chitasakas arise together with it. And depending on how you slice it, it can be either 89 types or 121 types. Usually the 89 types is the formula used. It's a really important concept to distinguish between Chitta and Chitasaka. And this bears not only on the theoretical structure of Abhidhamma, but on our meditation practice to understand clearly the difference between Chitta and Chitasaka. It's something that really needs to be clear in the mind. A lot of the difficulties that we have is through not clearly distinguishing these. Chitta just has one function, and that is to know. And when I say no, it's not in the sense of understanding. That's something more. It's in the simple sense of having an experience. This is chitta. One way of classifying consciousness or chitta or vijnana is into which is through which sense base it arises. So there's eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. That is 6. And these have the simple task of just experiencing the impression arising at that place. So, for example, eye consciousness is simply the awareness of color and shape. And some of the early schools even simplified it further and said it just aware of color, and that shape is actually imposed by the mind. But that's it. It's aware of color and shape. So when we look at, say, a tree, consciousness doesn't know a tree. It knows shape and color. You know, brown for the bark, green for the leaves. But that's all it experiences. And then the rest of the mental functioning recognizes as a tree, that sanya, and all the rest of it. You know, it goes on, arouses feelings, and it arouses mental formations. But the first initial impression is simply a knowing of color and shape. That's eye consciousness. So ear consciousness just knows frequency and amplitude. Mind consciousness is that, the 6th one, is that consciousness which knows the Chitasakas. So it knows the activity of mind. So the activity of mind is an object for the chitta. And we'll get into this. There'll be a subsequent talk on the cognitive series that goes into the details of how we cognize things. But I'll say here that mind consciousness also follows after sense consciousness. It's taken in by sense consciousness, and then the perception of the tree is then known by mind consciousness. So chitta works through the 6 senses. And each sense of the 5 physical senses, they're associated with a base. There's a physical sight that they work through. Eye consciousness, obviously, through the eye, and ear through the ear, and so on. And this is defined as something a bit more than just the physical eye. It's a subtle matter that is involved in the interface between the physical and the mental. Now, this raises the question of the 6th consciousness, the mano vijnana, mind consciousness. And there was actually quite a bit of discussion about that in the early days. What is the physical base, if any, of mind consciousness? The Patana, which is one of the Abhidhamma books, when in the section where it talks about the bases of the different consciousnesses, it it uses what's in Pali's the yang tang construction, whatever there, which is sort of like whatever in English. So whatever matter there might be that serves as the base for mind consciousness. So it doesn't specify a site. Later in the commentarial tradition, it became associated with the heart, which is Hadaya in Pali. Although there's again some controversy because Hadaya could just mean innermost place. Some of the early schools of Buddhism said that the base of mind consciousness is distributed throughout the entire body. It's interesting to us that none of the early Buddhists, as far as I can see, associated mind particularly with the brain. That's something we moderns definitely do, and it's obviously there's obviously some connection between mind and brain, and we could this is going off topic a bit, but I think it's worth discussing somewhat the what's called the mind-body problem. What is the nature of the relationship between the mind and the body? It seems to me that the modern view that mind originates in the brain is somewhat in error, and it's based on a technological model that we tend to think of the brain as a computer and the mind as the software. It could be a better model if we want to find a technological model. I felt that for a long time that a better model would be the brain as a radio receiver and the mind as the radio waves. That the brain doesn't originate the mind, but it interfaces with it to a large degree. Another part of the problem is that we have a tendency to think about the mind in substantialist or material terms, and this is itself very misleading. One source of this problem is linguistic, that it doesn't matter if we're talking in English or French or Pali or Thai or whatever language we might be using, we're going to have nouns that we use for concepts like consciousness or mind. And when we use a noun, there's an implicit assumption that there's something there. Whereas there is actually no substance or thing that we can call mind or consciousness. It's an act. It's knowing. And there's no thing or person that knows. There's just the act of pure knowing. The idea that mind is not always and necessarily, although it's usually associated with physical form. It's not always, because in the Buddhist worldview, there are at least two instances where mind exists independent of matter or body. One is at the moment of rebirth. The old body has ceased to exist, and mind arises somewhere else. So at that moment, it has no previous physical base. The other case is in the situation of existence in the formless realm, the arupa bhumi. And this is a level of existence that is mind only, without any physical base. As a mental exercise, it's useful to contemplate what existence might be like for a being in that realm. This helps to clarify for us the nature of mind separate from body, understand the distinguishing features of mind as opposed to materiality. One aspect of existence in the immaterial realm is that they have no location. They cannot be said to be here, there, anywhere, everywhere, nowhere. None of those apply, because physical location is an aspect of space, and space is a part of the physical existence. So mind per se does not have a physical location. We experience it in the human form associated with the body, but that association is dependency on the physical. Mind in its own nature does not have a location. And that may be the real reason why the Patana doesn't specify a physical base. It says whatever physical base there may be. Another reason is that in the Buddhist understanding, there is consciousness associated with at least all animal life. So there are simple animals with no brain, no nervous system, no heart, and yet they're conscious. Consciousness, or chitta, is also understood to arise in a new existence, a new human existence. It's understood to arise at the moment of conception. And this is actually what drives the unfolding of the organism. But for the first period of the unfolding of the embryo, there is no brain or nervous system or heart or anything else. It's just a clump of cells, but there's chitta associated with it. In the dependent origination, in the version that's given in the Digha Nikaya, it says that vijnana, which is roughly an equivalent of chitta, there may be some technical dispute about that, but leave that aside. It says that vijnana is dependent on namarupa, and namarupa is dependent on vijnana. They're mutually dependent. Namarupa is defined as being the rupa part is physical base, the four great elements, and or the body in practical terms, and nama are certain mental factors. That is perception, feeling, contact, um, attention, and chetana or volition. That's given in the text as a definition of nama, so it's a subcategory of chitasakas, and they're mutually dependent. They arise together in the course of leaving aside special cases like the arupa realm in human existence or in most other types of existence. Consciousness arises associated with these factors, the physical base and chitasakas. So this then leads on to the next area of interest, which is the relationship between chitta and chitasaka. These are both mental factors, non-physical, but they are different. Chitta, we have defined, is that quality which knows, the act of knowing. And always remember when we're talking about this stuff, not to make it a substance in your mind because we're forced to use nouns. It's the act of knowing is chitta. And chitasaka are those mental factors that arise associated with chitta. And in our normal course of existence, these are arising together every moment. We have chitta and some constellation of chitasakas. And we can't easily or normally separate them. An example is given in the in one of the commentaries of the Abhidhamma that separating the chitta from the chitasakas is like separating the ingredients in a soup. If you're or a sauce, if you have some dish and it was made with various spices and curries and meats and whatever, then you say, where's the salt? Where is the cumin in this? Where is the pepper? It's all together. It's always experienced by us as a constellation arising. And the chitta is defined by which factors arise with it, which vary in different circumstances. We'll get into that in more detail later, but the experience that we have is a combination of chitta and the chitasakas. The chitasakas are those factors associated with chitta that arise together with chitta. And there must always be an object, aramana. And this was quite specified quite clearly in the Theravada, in Abhidhamma, that it makes no sense to talk of consciousness without an object. I know you'll find that in some traditions that talk of pure consciousness without an object. In the Theravada Abhidhamma, it's specified there's no such thing. It makes no sense because it's the quality of chitta is taking an object. It's the act of taking an object. So it's quite meaningless to talk about chitta without an object. And as I said, in our normal course of existence, it's always associated with various chitasakas. At the very least, at each moment, there will be those five that are classified as nama, that is feeling, perception, contact, attention, and volition. And then in the Abhidhamma, they add uh, life faculty, jivatindriya, and singleness of mind, because it takes just a single object at a time. And the Chitasakas too are insubstantial. They have no self-substance. They're conditioned. They're empty of substance, empty of a self, impermanent, and arise according to conditions. So this is the nature of mind both ways. So get back to Chitta. I'm going to talk in a subsequent talk more about the classifications of Chitta, but to introduce the main themes here. Chitta, as I said, can be subdivided into normally 89 different kinds, and there you'll see in books on Abhidhamma often they'll have charts like cross-referencing the different kinds of chitta, because there are two major divisions that cut across each other. We can classify chitta either according to plane or level, or according to ethical quality. The division into plane is fourfold. There's a sense desire level consciousness. There is the consciousness of the level of form, the level of the formless, and of nibbana. And these four have a correspondence with planes of existence in the Abhidhamma or in the cosmology, and they also have reference to levels of jhana or meditative attainment. So the sense desire realm consciousness is our ordinary existence here as humans, where the consciousness operates mainly through the senses, and even the mind consciousness is oh, excuse me a second here. I've got my computer's acting up. Okay. In the sense desire consciousness, we have operation mainly through the senses, and the mind consciousness mainly deals with concerns around the senses. Most beings in the sense desire realm, their desires are around the senses. They want pleasant sense experience and avoid unpleasant sense experience. Their thoughts are built on sense experience, by and large. So this is a very complex and burdensome level of consciousness. It's the most confused. It's the most bewildered. And as we go into the higher levels of consciousness, they're more subtle. They're more pristine. They're more simple. They're more pure relative to the previous level. So the rupa level consciousness, the second plane, is associated with the jhanas, the four jhanas, and in the cosmology, it's associated with the Brahma gods. Now that means that for a Brahma god, rupa level consciousness is normal, but they can experience the lower levels if they advert to sense objects. Right? So there isn't 100% correspondence. Just as we can in our realm, we can enter into jhana and experience rupa level consciousness. So they're not exactly equivalent to the cosmology, but they have a strong overlap or correlation. And the third level of consciousness is the formless, which is associated with existence in the formless realm or the experience of the formless jhanas. And then nibbana, which is the unconditioned, which is beyond all of these and outside of all of these. The first three are all samsaric, they're all conditioned, they're all impermanent. So that's one way of dividing consciousness, by plane or level. The other way of dividing consciousness is by ethical consideration, or maybe more precisely to say by karma, by action. There are, again, generally classified as four, but they cut across the other ones. There is akusala karma, kusala karma, vipaka, and abhyakata. The kusala karma means skillful action. So that's what we would colloquially call good karma. So when you make any action with which originates in the mind, that's making a karma. And there's a particular level of or type of consciousness associated with that, which will be associated with certain Chitasakas. Or if we do it an unskillful action or a bad karma, then there's a different type of consciousness associated with a different set of Chitasakas. And this is where we have choice. We make actions originating in the mind. This is making karma. The other or the third type is vipaka, which is a result of karma. And this is something that is occurs due to past causes, and that we, at the moment of its occurrence, we have no control. This is a resultant. And one interesting detail here is that every sense impression that we experience is classed as vipaka. So this means that what we experience in the world, one of the causes is always our past karma that we have made. It's important not to be too simplistic about this, because one of the rules of Abhidhamma around karma is, or around conditionality in general, is that nothing arises without a cause, but also nothing arises from a single cause. So there's a constellation of causes for every event. And our sense experience has physical external causes. It also has internal physical causes, such as the condition of our eyes and ears. But it also has a causal factor of previous karma. We wouldn't experience what we do if we hadn't made karma for it. So there's those three types. Then the fourth type is functional consciousness, which are consciousness moments that just serve a technical purpose in the cognizing of objects, that have that we don't make any karma at that moment, nor are we receiving results. They have nothing to do with karma. And they're just part of the process of cognizing. You just have a a technical purpose in the stream of consciousness. This will become more clear when we talk about um, the cognitive series, which is how we cognize an object, a breakdown of how that works. So we can analyze that consciousness in these various ways, either by plane or by the comic association or quality. And the various cross references yield altogether 89 types, which we'll hopefully get into a little bit more detail later in a subsequent talk. So I'm kind of coming to the end of what I wanted to cover. I'm just going to recap the main point here. Is that the Abhidhamma is an analysis of ultimate reality, and it tries to take things down to the Paramatta Dhamma level, which is the end of analysis, is how far we can analyze things. And our mind creates panyatis, which are more complex structures built out of dhammas, and is how we ordinarily perceive the world. And the Paramatta level of reality, or the ultimate, or the bedrock reality, is divided into these four categories: materiality, the knowing mind, mental processes, that is Cheetah and Chitasica, and Nibbana, about which little can be usefully said. So most of the Abhidhamma focuses on Cheetah and Chitasica, although there's also a analysis of matter that we'll get into later. And the Chitta is the knowing, and it's important to remember that we're talking about an act of knowing. There's no substantial entity. There is no one or no thing that knows. There's just knowing. And the Chitasakas are the mental qualities that arise together with Chitta moment by moment. And they are also conditioned, impermanent, and insubstantial. So I'll leave that for today and go to questions, and we'll dive into a bit more depth into the nature of the different aspects of mind next time. So let's see. We've got. I try not to look. I get too distracted. I try not to look at the chat while I'm talking, but I'll look at it now and see. Looks like there's some questions already up. See, Zen people don't stress much on character development in ethics. Is it possible to have satori and not be an ethical person? I would say that generally not. I don't think you have to be perfectly ethical, but if your ethics are so bad, you're making so much akusala kamma, you're not going to be able to get a settled, clear mind. Chuti chitta, or departing consciousness, is said to be 7 times more powerful than we have now before death, so that I can reflect even very minute incidents happening in this life. For example, 30 years back, July 1st, we had no idea, but this Chuti consciousness is the power to know in detail. So, do you have any idea on this? What he's talking about, Chuti Chitta, is the death moment consciousness. And it's possible, like what you're talking about, often people say that their life flashed before their eyes, when they're close to death. If they come back from it, that'll be one of the common experiences. It could be. Generally, what is spoken about in the Theravada Abhidhamma is that the moments before death, one sees a sign of destiny, that is kind of a vision of future rebirth. As the body fails, as one gets close to death, the mind becomes untethered from that base, and it may be that there are moments of supernormal clarity that might include memories of this life or even previous lives. It's also a very important or very powerful in determining the rebirth are the last moments before death, that one should be as careful as possible to keep the mind in a wholesome condition, at the being thinking of positive things, particularly associated with Dhamma towards the end. Another question. Greetings, Bhante. Did you say Chitasaka as objects of the mind? Please clarify. Yes, Chitasaka. I'll spell that. I don't. I'm assuming that's what you're referring to. The spelling is like this. Chitasaka is considered object of consciousness from the point of view of consciousness. This is a relation, so it's relative. So from consciousness, or chitta is, if we take that as a subject, and it is intrinsically subjective, it's all that it does is know. It cannot be an object. So the other activities of the mind are known to chitta, so they're objective. They exist in the field of chitta. So there's this relationship of subject-object between chitta and chitasaka. I have heard insight teachers refer to something called the death field at the time pre-death experience with the dying and people around them. I have never got a source in Theravada. I don't recognize that either as an idea. It doesn't come from Theravada scriptures, I don't think. I think there could be kind of loosely talking, a field, the death field. Said that maybe just referring to the kind of idea of consciousness of the people affected by people around a dying person will be affected by that in some way. So I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. I'll give you another minute or two if anybody thinks of something, and then we'll close it off. If not, you're welcome. Somebody thanking me. How can we use Abhidhamma without getting overwhelmed by its complexity? Yeah, it is complex, and it's actually to get nature of the study of Abhidhamma, that to get value from it, to actually have to make it useful in your own inner life, you have to delve into the complexity. That the insights come from the accumulation of many details. And it is a field you can endlessly delve into. It's, and historically, that this is what's happened. There's been layers and layers of discussion and debate and clarification, so on. Are you familiar with Ramana Margarashi and his lectures on the location of Chitta? Is there any relevance or need to locate or see it as having a special location? I'm not familiar with that name. Ramana Magarashi. No, I don't know who he is. And I tend to think it's best to just imagine. Always clarified the spelling. Ramana Maharashi. No, I don't know him. I don't think it's really possible to specify a location, because it's mind. Mind is non-physical. It doesn't really have a location. And while we're in a human form, there's an association with the body, but doesn't mean it's like something located within the body. If you really have to try and avoid any kind of substantialist thinking, not to reify mental concepts. Ajahn Chah talks about a still mind being a natural, unadulterated state of mind. How does this relate to the subject object knowing you referred to and stillness in meditation? Yeah. Well, the mind in deep meditation has the quality of samadhi, which is the stillness or non-wavering of mind, which means that it's not flitting about from object to object. So the mind is at peace. It's resting in place. So if we're meditating on the breath, the mind is filled with the breath. Meditating on a kasina, the mind is filled with the image of the kasina. So it has an object, but it's not normally the unstill mind, the busy mind, is constantly flitting from object to object, driven by desire. But in deep samadhi, that's not present. The mind's at peace and is resting solidly on a single object. Is the objective world, i.e. matter, ever create consciousness? It seems both are totally opposite. In that case, all matter are conscious. They know they are. No, the Theravada Abhidhamma is not pantheistic. It doesn't hold that all matter is conscious. Matter is matter and mind is mind. Mind doesn't arise out of matter. It exists in the human form. It exists associated with matter, but it's not caused by matter. Why do you think New Age spirituality today is so fixated on the fifth khandha, the fixation on living in the moment, body consciousness, etc.? I see a lot of mainstream Buddhists doing this. Well, being aware of the body and kaya nusati, that's one of the four foundations. That's important, but you don't want to make that the be all and the end all. It's not to forget the importance of mind. When we are asleep, is mind in hibernation? Well, there's two phases of sleep, of course. There is the deep sleep and there's dreaming sleep. And in deep sleep, the mind is resting in bhavanga, which is a type of consciousness. We'll definitely get into this. It's like the mind in neutral. It's the mind is inactive. There's still consciousness, but it's at a very base level. And in dreaming sleep, the mind is more active and it's playing with perception. Is perception unfettered by the physical senses? Is this more idiocentric to the Occident? Well, this is referring back to the question about fixation on the body. Yeah, I think there is that thing in this tendency in the West to or at least in modern West, I should say, we should specify, to avoid or not think about or look at transcendence. It's all about the here and now, and making things, making yourself content in samsara. And it's kind of a corruption of modern Buddhism, and it's definitely a new age. I am confused with the brain, because in no case it seems brain matter arrangement can be cause of subjective experience. I mean, a sensor knows the sight, but I don't know it knows. In that case, all matters are just that. There's no thing in that. As we think of mass itself as an appearance with no real stuff, is there no thing called stuff of stuff? Well, it's a lot in one question. I'm not sure where you're going with all of that, but yeah, the brain is matter. It's material, and there obviously some association with with how we experience mind in this embodied form. But I think it's a mistake to think that mind originates in the brain. Mind operates with the brain. And we know now from modern understanding of the brain that they call something called brain plasticity, that the brain can actually change its wiring, its structure, depending on what you do with the mind. So the causal relationship is not just one way. How are stages of insight fitting into Abhidhamma concepts? That's a very big question. If you want to explore that, I would look at some of the Burmese masters, particularly Mahasi Sayadaw and Ledi Sayadaw. They get into that kind of stuff in great detail. Everything that the Mahasi Sayadaw writes really is informed by Abhidhamma. He's working within that concept. So follow up on a previous question. In that case, all matters are just that, and there's no such thing in that as we think. Is mass itself an appearance with no real stuff? Is there no thing called stuff of stuff? Well, I'm going to do at least one of these talks on the Abhidhamma understanding of matter, but the kind of general answer to that is that matter is considered to be existent in the Theravada, and this is not all early Buddhists agreed with this. Some of them had to idealist position that there's only mind and matter doesn't exist outside of the mind. But Theravada did see this as a separate category of reality, is matter, but it's not stuff in the sense, a crude sense, which even in modern physics we no longer hold that there's stuff. There's an interplay of different energies, really. And in the Theravada understanding, there's only momentary dhammas that are themselves without inherent self-substance. No, they only have qualities. There's a little bit of a digression here, but I think it's important
It's
to
7 o'clock.
clarify this point. There was in ancient India, outside of or early prior to Buddhism, and then also developed later, the idea of a substance and essence, or substance and qualities, essence and qualities. The similar concept in the West with from Aristotle, but we have in the Indian version there was the idea that there was uh, an essence. Things have an essence, and then the essence can be modified by different qualities, such as color, temperature, size, whatever. Whereas in the Buddhist view of a Dhamma, the Dhamma itself is the quality. So a Dhamma of material earth element, is just the quality of hardness. There's no substance bearing that quality. How much does the body influence the mind? Quite a bit in our physical, in human form. I mean, it's obvious. It's quite simple to see that, if you're tired, your mind is dull. If you're exhausted, your mind is dull. You can directly, through physical means, you can directly affect the mind, for example, taking various drugs. But also, the mind obviously affects the body. Like if I move my arm, it's my mind is telling my body to move. So that there's a mutual relationship, body and mind. It's not just one way. There's a mutual back and forth. Ajahn Mahabua once described the state of Chitta as being incredibly bright. In what sense is it described as being light or bright? Is this visual or metaphorical? I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, it subjectively can be experienced as brightness, as sort of, but it is a metaphor. It's a visual metaphor, because the mind is the knowing, the act of knowing is essentially light, is putting a light on an object. And if the mind is completely purified, undefiled, then it's perceived as being very luminous. Is one of the fundamental delusions the impression that words correspond to real physical objects? Yes, yeah, that's actually quite true. The Buddha said that use conventional language, but don't be fooled thereby. That we fall into the error of getting kind of caught up in our own concepts and words. There are some cases in which Chuti consciousness departs and even re-enters the same body. That means the person dies from when it comes back to life again. Is Chuti consciousness abandoning the body by mistake and re-entering? I don't know if for sure what to say about that. I would think it's not really. My first instinct is to say that it's not really Chuti consciousness. If you come back, you still have not. If you haven't, that if it's a real death consciousness, then the body's no longer able to serve as a base, and that the consciousness will arise elsewhere. But someone on the close to death or on the edge of death may have the experience of leaving the body and coming back. Because close to death, the relationship between mind and body is looser, is breaking down. Last question for me. In a Dhamma talk, someone made a simile of cows leaving a gate. Like Kansas, possibly. Yeah, still waiting for a question there. Kamas. I can't locate that. Yeah, I don't know. I can't help you. I know the closest thing I can think of is there is a and I can't remember the exact source, but there is a simile used in one of the suttas about counting cows, or counting another man's cows. Like there's a hired man that counts the cows as they come out of the gate, and that's someone who studies the teachings but doesn't put them into practice. It's like counting another man's cows. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. Okay, it's well over an hour now. I think I'll take my leave from you, good people, and he's saying he thinks it had something to do with the time of death. No, I don't recognize it in that context. Okay.